Well, good morning. Thank you. If you were here last week and heard Palmer speak, how many of you were here last week? My name is Bob. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, then don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. The stories were all exaggerated, mostly. If you're new or visiting, my name is Paul. One of my jobs here is I'm pastor of our Serve the World, so all of our global and local outreach. I get the joy of going to places like Malawi and Liberia and Thailand and Haiti and working with downtown Chandler. And a whole chunk of my job is living and going and partnering overseas. And for me, it's one of the coolest things that I get to do is to take a whole group of people like you with me to foreign countries and to go and being a person in that setting that doesn't destroy it, but actually brings peace and brings hope and brings love. One of the first things I learned as a kid growing up overseas was that I don't need to know the language, but I do need to know how to greet people. It's very important anywhere you go. In fact, even here locally, you go to a different high school, every different school has a different handshake. They have a different greeting. Each town has a different way they greet each other. And in each country that I go to, you have to learn the greeting. It's the first thing that you learn. For example, when I go to Malawi, I'll put out my hand. If I'm meeting a chief, I'll put my left hand on my right arm and I'll tilt down a little bit and I look him straight in the eye. And I say, Muli Banji. And then he'll say back to me, Didi Bueno Gaino. And then I say, Zikomo. And then we stand there for about 2.5 hours holding hands awkwardly. But that's part of their custom, so you just go with it. And that whole time, you're looking them in the eye, and you're just saying, I see you. When I go to Thailand, you look at the person, you bow your head a little bit, and you say, Sawadee Kap. If you're a girl, you would say, Sawadee Ka. And you hold out that Ka. And it's very beautiful language, but you sit there and you look at them. But you have your head down a little bit, and you're this respect of, I see you. China, I was just over there. Each person you greet, you go around the room, you shake your hand, you look them right in the eye, and you say, Ni hao. Which is just really fun to say. In fact, I Googled it the other day because I've been saying it so much. Ni hao, ni hao. You know when you say something too much and you're like, am I really saying the right word? And it is. It's how you greet. And each time, like I said, you greet the person, you look at them. When I do this, when I meet somebody new in a new country, in a new place, or even around here, I like to look them in their eye and imagine what their life story is. Like what's brought them to this point where we're exchanging greetings, where we're looking each other in the eye. And I know they're doing the same thing to me. One of the things that they always say in Malawi is, how did you get here? Like, did you put like your church inside of a plane? And did the plane, like, did you fly the church? I'm like, no, we didn't fly the church. We got in the plane. But how does it stay up in the air? I don't know. It's metal. I don't understand it either. And so we have this time of just looking at each other and getting to know each other. More importantly, you're saying to them, I see you. Like I see who you are right in front of me. I see you. The hardest thing about my job, to be honest with you, is when I come back to America. When I'm in a village in Malawi, every single person is screaming, Mulibanji, Mulibanji. And they're just everyone's greeting you. Everyone's waving. Everyone wants to hold your hand. They all want to come and look you right in the eye and say, I see you. When I come back to America, I see this. Hey, how's it going? What's up? How you doing? And I've started the process of, hey, how you doing? Even if I don't know them, I'll bend down. It's gotten to the point, though, where it's so much like this, I'll just stop right in front of whoever you are. I don't care if I know you, and I'll just stop, and I'll be like waiting for them. Slam into me. How you doing? I see you. They walk around. You know, we have a tendency as Americans to live behind our walls. And I'll be the first person to admit, I love going home, sitting in my backyard, and looking at my walls where nobody can see me, and I just get my own safety, free time. Everybody stay out. But what I've realized, what I've started to do as well, is I'm just as guilty of walking around like this. And I'm just as guilty of starting to get to the point where I realize I'm creating my own walls. Not just at my house, but as I walk, as I go throughout my day, I put up my walls. And I tell certain people, okay, you can come in every now and then. But a good chunk of the time, what I'm putting off as I walk around, as I go throughout my day is, hey, Stay outside my walls. Give me my space. You think about America. You think about where we live. It's this melting pot of culture, of race, of politics, of class, of backgrounds. And I believe that's what makes this amazing to live here, because it is just this amazing melting pot of all different backgrounds. And yet, if you think about how we live, there's so much we could learn from that. But we do have this tendency to say, these are my walls. This is my area. You take who we are as a country, and then you take who we are as a church, and you get that same background, that same demographic that comes in, and they meet together in a church, and we do life together once a week, sometimes twice a week. And we're all supposed to become one as we follow this Jesus. But that's a hard thing sometimes when we have all of these different backgrounds, all these different ideas, all these different politics. This morning we're looking at race. We're looking at culture. We're looking at our class. And to be honest with you, as I stand here, that's a hard thing to speak on. And as I've been praying and meditating on this, one of the things that I keep coming back to is this word grace. Because ultimately, when you think about who we are, how we live, where we're from, how we grew up, what our background is, what our struggles are, what our personalities are, what our walls are, what our struggles are, what our beauty is, what our hope is, it all boils down to grace. And are you going to grant me grace? And am I going to give you grace? Am I going to begin to tear down my walls and say, you know what, I need to have more grace in my life? But to be honest with you, I'm a person who likes comfort. And I think we all, to some degree, like comfort. You even think about right now, where you're sitting. If you've been here before, did you sit within 2 or 3 rows of where you're sitting? And is that consistently where you're sitting? Last night I said, maybe next week, maybe you just need to sit someplace else. The people sitting at the table over there all went, nope, not moving. And I'm not going to point fingers at all or anybody, but some of you get to church really early and claim your seat. I'm going to move that couch next week. This is my spot. Now, when somebody new comes in and they're sitting in your spot, you stop and you're like, I don't even know how to worship today because that's my spot. And so you awkwardly stand over him and like, oh, we're new here. Is this where you normally sit? No, it's cool. So I'll go find Jesus someplace else, I guess. We become creatures of comfort. I like to sit in the same spot. I like to go to the same restaurant. And when I go to that same restaurant, I order the same thing every single time. I like to drive the same way home. I like my comfort. I like to sit in my backyard where no one's there. I like to be alone. But the more I read Scripture, the more I dive deeper into this, the more I realize God calls us to be uncomfortable, to live the type of life that is out of our comfort zone. But it's hard when we have our favorite things, our favorite places, our favorite people, our favorite relatives. And that's okay. The problem is when we build our own personal walls and we say, okay, I'm only letting in these 3 people. I'm only going to these 2 places. I'm only going to sit in this one seat. Your favoritism then builds a whole different level of uncomfort that's not healthy. I was reading this week, and one of the quotes I read about favoritism says this. It says, favoritism is purposefully neglecting the needs of the many to accommodate the greeds of a few. While favor is the art of inclusion, favoritism is the exercise of exclusion. Christianity is an inclusive faith that bids all to come. If you think of that word again, all, it's bidding all to come. Well, the first word you look at is inclusive. Inclusive means that it's open to everyone and everything is covered. We're going to an inclusive resort. Everything's covered. We had a great deal. And you think that you get all you can eat, food, drinks, everything. Oh, anything's free. It's cheaper. It's not cheaper. You just pay way more in the beginning. You can't out-eat their cost ratio. Inclusive, sure. It's all covered. Would you say at the Grove we're inclusive? Everyone's invited. Yeah, we want everyone to come into the Grove, family, friends, whoever. Everyone needs Jesus. The next word was inclusion. Inclusion means something or someone taken in as part of the whole, the act of including. Which means if you're being brought in, then you can't just sit. You can't just be. You can't just exist. Because inclusion means that you are being brought in and taken in as part of the whole. So if the whole mob is moving this way, you can't just come and stand still. You have to move with it. So if you look at who we are as a church body, when we bring somebody new in, somebody that's never been here, we tell them this is the journey that we're on. We need you to be a part of it. We want you to be a part of it. More so, we say, I see you. I see you for who you are. I see you for your weaknesses, your flaws, your strengths, and we still need you. This idea of grace, where he says, look, I understand we all have these different gifts. We all have these different backgrounds, but you are desperately needed here. I think it's sad that sometimes people go to church and they're just there and they don't feel like they're needed or wanted. And sadly, that's one of the most painful things when somebody comes into a building and they see everything that's going on and they don't feel included. I heard a story recently of a guy who vowed to never go to church, and so the pastor kept inviting him. And he said, finally, okay, I'll go, but I'm just going because there's cute girls. And the pastor, that's all right, whatever your motives. So he started going. He's like, hey, I need you to know I like it, but it's not because you're preaching. It's just I feel good there. That's okay, you just keep coming. And one day he said to him, he goes, hey, I met this Jesus guy. And I'm in relationship with this God thing now, and it's unbelievable. And it wasn't because of your preaching, and it wasn't because of your singing. It's because people hugged me. He said, what? He goes, you know that awkward time, that 2-minute meet and greet? He goes, my whole life, people have ignored me and I've been invisible. But every time we had that greeting time, people would come and they'd give me a hug. He goes, I craved that attention and I realized I was being included in this beautiful journey of Jesus. You know, you think about who we are, and yes, I'm standing on stage and there were people up here playing, but the church more so is you. And as we look this morning at what it means to really thrive and belong to a church community, and how our different backgrounds and our races and our cultures actually makes us better, we're going to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 12. And as I've read this in the past, I've always read it from the angle of just my spiritual gifts, how God uniquely made me, and how I was designed to do certain things for him. But as I've studied it, I've realized there's such a deeper meaning behind it. And I'm going to read through the whole passage, and then we're going to look at it. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 12, it says, just as the body, though one has many parts, but all its many parts form one body. So it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit so as to form one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, slave or free. And when we are all given the one Spirit to drink, even so the body is not made up of one part, but of many. Now if the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? Do you ever read the Bible and go, this should be like Alice in Wonderland. Like, what in the world is going on? But in fact, God has placed the parts in the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts but one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. The head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And the parts that we think are less honorable, we treat with special honor. And the parts that are unpresentable are treated with special modesty. While our presentable parts need no special treatment, but God has put the body together, giving greater honor to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. Now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it. Now, if you don't fully understand that passage, it's just kind of glosses over and you read through it and you're like, all right, cool. But if you read the beginning, if you go back to the very first part of it, it says, all of its many parts form one body. So it is with Christ. We were all baptized by one Spirit to form one body. So all of us come from all different kinds of background to form one church body. Then he says whether Jews or Gentiles. The original language said whether Jews or Greeks, slave or free, we were all given the one Spirit to drink. The first century reader would have read that and went, wait a minute. Like, you're crossing the line. This is ridiculous. So keep in mind, the world they lived in was very segregated. The Jews lived here. The Gentiles were over here. The Greeks were over here. Everybody had their place. The slaves were over here. The wealthy were over here. Somewhat similar to the world we still live in sometimes. But when they read this, it would have just been absolutely, wait a minute. First of all, it says whether you're Jews or Gentiles. So what he's saying is this church body is no longer just for the Jewish people who the original reader was. They're saying this is now open to everyone. Open up your doors and everyone is included. This Jesus story is not just for the Jews, but it's for every race on the planet. At that point, they would have stopped and they would have put it down and they would have just really thought, every race? You know, that's a hard thing to say. Even if you look at who we are right now in America, you could probably stop and you begin to think of this melting glass of who we are in regards to race and even politics and culture and class. You stop and you think about those things, and it's a hard thing to speak on. I've been reading a book called Gracism. And in this book, he takes this passage and he says, you know, I've been dealing with this for years. The book is called Gracism. It's called The Art of Inclusion. His name is David Anderson. He's an African-American pastor in Maryland. He said, I've been reading this passage for years, and I've been diving deeper and studying it, looking at what the original meaning was, and understanding that it's not just my spiritual gifts, but it's who we are as a race. It's who we are in culture. It's who we are in our backgrounds. And so he rewrote this passage from the understanding of if we were to read this today, how would this be translated? So he paraphrased it. He put it in his own words. But when I read it through here, first of all, it was hard. It was hard to read. But secondly, it made it in a whole different light of how we are supposed to be the church body. So I'm going to read this to you. So this is his interpretation of what we just read. Now the body is not made up of one culture, but of many. If the blacks should say to the whites, because I'm not white, I don't belong to the body, it would not make it true. The blacks would still be part of the body, whether they vote for the same candidates or not. And if the whites should say, because I'm not black, I do not belong to the body, it would not make it true. The whites would still be part of the body, whether they clapped their hands and shouted loudly in church or not. It doesn't mean that they are not filled with the Spirit. If the whole body was tightly structured, where would the sense of spontaneity be? If the whole body was spontaneous, where would the sense of order be? As it is, there are many parts and many cultures, but one body. The Cuban church cannot say to the Haitian church, I don't need you. The Puerto Rican church cannot say to the Mexican church, I don't need you. The Japanese cannot say to the Koreans, I don't need you. The suburban church cannot say to the urban church, I don't need you. The city church cannot say to the country church, I don't need you. Jews cannot say to Arabs, I don't need you. Palestinians cannot say to Jews, I don't need you. On the contrary, these parts of the body that seem to be weaker are not to be dismissed or discarded as if they don't matter. They are God's special instruments of honor to reveal an aspect of God that would otherwise not be seen or experienced. There really is no part of the Christian body that is to be dismissed as unimportant. They all matter. If the Palestinian Christians suffer, we all suffer. If South African Christians are freed from apartheid, we all rejoice with them. now that you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it. When you read it from that angle, it's powerful and difficult. You know, when we think of race, when he wrote here, whether Jews or Greek, he was in the beginning of this statement saying, this is for everyone. For me, whenever I'm studying or preparing, one of the things that God does in my life is he begins to dig deeper and peel away the layers. And I begin to ask myself, okay, how do I do in regards to this? And so my response is I'm praying and talking with God as well. I was raised overseas in Asia, so I was a complete minority. I was the only white kid on my street. But then I moved to Montana, where the entire state felt like it was white. And then I moved down to Guatemala and had to learn a new culture and a new language and adopted 2 kids that were little Guatemalan girls. Now I spend a good chunk of my life traveling overseas and immersing myself in different cultures. I think I do okay. I think I'm doing well in that area. Well, whenever you tell God that you're doing well in a certain area, he has a tendency to kind of shift the focus a little bit. 2-3 weeks ago, I was down by the Live Love House, which is right across from Chandler High School, and I was working on some stuff. Everybody had left, and I was all by myself. I was in the front yard by my truck. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw these 2 guys walking towards me. Now, one of the things that I tell my teams when we travel is to be aware of everything that's around you. Not from like a paranoid perspective, but just don't travel with your head down. Always be aware of where you are, who's around you, what's happening. Just understand your surroundings. So as I'm sitting here working, I notice out of the corner of my eye, I see these guys walking. So I do just a little shift, and I look at them, just a little head nod. Now, on the street, in case you're wondering, that means I see you. So I just give them a little, I see you, and I go back to my work, and I keep working, and I notice they're still coming right at me. To set the scene, they look completely different from me. And they're covered in tattoos, like covered. One of my best friends has sleeves. I'm okay with that. I have no problem with that. But I instantly went, they might be gang members. Like I jumped there. And then they're almost at me, and so I shift again, and I give them a little, hey, I see you, what's going on? And I turn back around. The whole time, they're just staring at me, and they're just walking towards me. In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, they're going to jump me. Now, if they jump me, does that mean I'm officially part of the gang? And can I, like, roll with them and still be a pastor? Like what do we do here? Fully, this is happening in my head. And so about 10, 15 feet away, I turn. Now, I'm a Jesus-loving, live-love, pacifist type dude. I don't want any fights. I don't want nothing. But I put my shoulders back, and I clench my fists a little bit. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to do this, but you got to be ready. Like, fully, like, sup? Like, and the whole time, they're just looking at me. And they stop, and they both stand there. We're literally probably this close to each other. And they're just looking, and I'm like, to Jesus, thank you for this day. And they say, excuse me, sir, do you have a toilet plunger we could borrow? In case you didn't hear me. Excuse me, sir, do you have a toilet plunger we can borrow? I'm like, a toilet plunger? You want a toilet plunger? I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, they're not going to beat me up. They just want a toilet plunger. And I was instantly like, yeah, I just totally failed. Like I completely judged them just because of what they looked like. And as I'm standing here, I'm like, I got a toilet plunger for you. You know what? I'm going to go get come on in. And we're talking. I give them the toilet plunger, and they said, yeah, we heard about you guys. We heard you guys are like a live love thing, and people come here and you help them, right? I'm like, yeah, that's us. Cool. You're not going to kill me. And I was like, he's like, thank you. Our toilets are clogged, and, you know, we just thought you'd have a toilet plunger. And so I said, you know what? You can keep this toilet plunger. Because I don't know what you're going to do with it, but I don't ever want it back. Now, a couple weeks later, they got arrested because they were squatting in the house. So part of my intuition was true. But I sat there and went, I failed. Like I failed. You know, the beauty, when you look at race, and you look at what brings us together as a church body, when you look at our backgrounds, we look at who we are, I just think it's beautiful when I go and meet these people and I look them in the eye and I shake their hands. Their story is so different from mine, and I can learn so much. I was watching National Treasure the other day. It's on every third day on about every channel on cable. And there's a scene where the dude gets a Declaration of Independence, and he puts these glasses on, and he's looking through these different lenses. And each time he changes one of the lenses, he sees something else in the Declaration of Independence and all this hidden code and stuff. And so he keeps switching it and keeps switching it and keeps switching it. And all of a sudden I realized, you know what? That's what it's like with our faith, with our own personal Jesus story. We all have this different lens, this different story, this different background, this different path that leads us all together as a church body. And there's so much we can learn from that. And I believe that's why Paul, when he's writing this, says we are one body, whether Jews or Greek or Gentiles. It is so important to understand the value of seeing these different stories and how they come together. The second thing that he says, whether you're Jews or Gentiles or Greek, in other words, he says it's not only about your race, but it's also about your culture. You know, when you think about the culture that you live in, suburban world, inner city, America, around the world, all these different cultures and backgrounds bring us to who we are today. And when I say culture, a lot of us will instantly go to think of where our culture is in America. A lot of us will say, oh, we're lost. We're done. Forget about it. I was listening to a sermon by Carl Lentz, who's a pastor at Hillsong Church in New York City, and he was speaking in London at a conference. He was speaking on culture. He said this: a little bit of grace opens up room for a whole lot of truth. He said what we see in our culture today is getting messier, and it's getting complicated, and it's getting nastier and nastier. And to this, I see a whole lot of Christian reactions, but I don't see a whole lot of graceful responses. He says, why do we Christians get mad at the world for acting like the world? You know, if you think about who we are here, there's not a person here in this room that doesn't have sin, that doesn't have flaw, that doesn't have junk. And yet we come together and we gracefully say, we welcome you here. But so often we have a tendency to throw the first stone or cast the first judgment. You can go on Facebook or social media, and it's going to take you a minute and a half to find two sides of any issue and to see Christians just throwing down. And that's the hardest thing for me when I look at our graceful responses. How are we called to go out into culture and to show love? In Ephesians chapter 2, it says this. It says, as for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins, in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world and of the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the Spirit, who is now at work in those who are disobedient. All of us also lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our flesh, following its desires and thoughts, and like the rest, we were by nature deserving of wrath. But because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace that you have been saved. You know, you look at Jesus. One of the things I've been thinking about lately is, how did Jesus live through this? You know, oftentimes we look at what Jesus did, but very rarely do we really try to process how he walked, how he spoke, how he lived. My wife gave a sermon on the woman of the well about a year ago, and that story, for some reason, just keeps coming back the last couple weeks, and I keep processing through how Jesus reacted. He goes and he's at the well, and he's talking to a lady who's from a completely different race and a completely different culture, and he just sits there and he speaks with her, and his comments are filled with truth and love. And as they have this conversation at the end of it, she says, "You're the Messiah. Like, you're the one we've been waiting for." And she runs back into town and she tells everyone, "I found the Messiah." And you see by this simple interaction that Jesus had while they were getting water at the well, an entire town comes into relationship with Jesus. You look at another story where Jesus is with a bunch of children, and these men drag out this girl and it says she's been caught in adultery. And Jesus just sits there and he draws in the sand. And he just sits there and he listens. And finally he stands up and he says, Whoever of you is without sin, throw the first stone. And it's just deathly silent. And I imagine them dropping their stones one at a time and walking away. In other words, yeah, she did something wrong. So have you, and so have you, and so have you. And Jesus looks at her and he just gives her grace. He grants her forgiveness. He shows her hope and love. And as we look at our culture today, as we look at everything that's going on all around us, what if we stopped and we just paused and we said, is my response filled with grace right now? The last thing you see when he talks about whether this is written to the Jews or the Greeks, then he says slave or free. At that point, the reader would have put it down and said, this teaching's too much. Like, fine, you want to bring it to different races, different cultures, different backgrounds, but to different classes, there's this gap. I can look at somebody and I can say, well, you're probably from this race and this culture, and I can judge you from your outer layer. But class, there's this gap. Oftentimes, you don't know necessarily where they're from. But then he says slave or free, slave or wealthy, slave or upper class. You're saying this is open for the poor and the sick and the lepers? This is open for everybody? This Jesus thing is not just for a specific group? For everyone? What would happen if we would open our doors to homeless people? I have to be honest, as a pastor, we've had some homeless guys come through here, and I feel like we failed. I feel like we didn't love them enough. I feel like we didn't show grace. See, there's a story in Genesis chapter 16. I spoke on part of this last time I preached. Sarai and Abram are trying to have kids, and they have no kids, and so Sarai has the brilliant idea, here, Abram, go sleep with my slave, get her pregnant, and we'll raise the kid. Now, just so you know, it's not really the best idea in the world. And then she gets angry, and then she gets mad, and Abram says, look, the slave is in your hands. Do with her what you want. And so it says, then Sarai mistreated Hagar. And it says, the angel of the Lord, it says, so she fled and she ran away. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. Then the angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now pregnant. You will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your misery, and he will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. See, Hagar, the slave, living in the wrong culture, the wrong time, is being abused by the person who owns her. And the angel says, you need to go back and you need to submit. And then he also says, you're going to have a child, you're going to name him Ishmael. Ishmael means, the literal translation is God hears you. God hears what you're saying. And then she said, she gives the name to the Lord. This is the first time where God has given a name. It says, you are the God who sees me. So first of all, God hears you. And then you see that he sees you. And then in this story, you see that, it's difficult. Life's going to be hard. But the angel says, you need to go back and you need to submit and you need to carry on where you're at. But understand this. He sees you. He hears you. I think if you take that story and apply it to our lives, all of us sit here in areas of struggle, of pain, of doubt. And the same teaching where he says, I see you. I hear you. I hear your cries. I hear your pain. I hear your struggle. But more importantly, I really believe that he also says, I need you. I need your story. I need your background. I need your grace. As a body, we are called to live out that grace. The question is how? And who? Who do we give this to? Well, if you read the scriptures, we give that grace to everyone. To everyone. Whether that's easy or not. How? That's a different issue. I just printed up these hats. They're live, love. You may be able to see the live, but not the love. The live is printed in white. The love is printed in black. Because you can see live and understand that, you know what, if we're honest, if you're following the basic principles of life, eat, sleep, drink, you're going to live. I'm not saying it's going to be the greatest life, but if you follow the basic principles, you can live. Every single one of us can live. We can have a life. What we choose to do with that is up to us. This love thing, when I think about grace, when I think about looking at different races and cultures and classes, when I think about this idea of, does God really hear me? Does he really see me? Does he really need me? And how am I, just a simple dude, supposed to bring that to people? Well, I have to get close enough to this hat to be able to see the word love. For me, that's a reminder, if I am going to bring grace, if I am going to bring love, if I'm going to bring hope, if I'm going to bring change, I have to go through life close to people. I have to bring people in. I have to bring people in that are different than me, that have different stories, have different lenses, different backgrounds, different ideas. I have to live the type of life that I can walk alongside you. I don't have to agree with everything you do, but I do have to bring the grace and the hope and the love that Jesus grants us. I can't live the type of life as a Christ follower that says, these are my walls, and I'm not going to let you in because of your differences. I'm not going to let you in because of the things you say. I'm not going to let you in because of the things you do. But I do need to be close enough to you so that you understand this hope and this love and this grace of Jesus Christ is true and it's life-changing. Jesus looks down at every single one of us and he says, I see you. It changes how I live, because there's been times when I felt like he didn't see me and he didn't need me and he didn't know me and he didn't understand me, but he sees me. He sees me. Every single one of you, you have to understand that he sees you and he loves you and he says, I need you.